You must have seen this article back here in early October, which talks about how a newly MOP'd 5-room Bidadari HDB unit sold for $1.2 million. $1.2 million is a lot of money. But how much did the seller actually make after paying off his stamp duties, his interest, his taxes, and his agent fees? And how much of this $1.2 million was actually his own money that he had to put in to begin with? And did you manage to spot the mistake in the article? Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Daryl, and in this channel we demystify real estate topics and make them digestible to the layman. So remember to like and subscribe if you want more unbiased property videos that would help you through your property journey. According to this Mothership article, this newly MOP'd unit was sold for $1.2 million. It is from Alkaff Vista, which completed in 2019, 5 years ago. This project was open for balloting all the way back in 2015. It was a mid-level unit in a 17-story block. The size of the unit is 1,216 square feet. Alkaff Vista is a pretty convenient project. It is just 12 minutes away from Woodleigh MRT, which is then 20 minutes to Dhoby Ghaut by train. Let's briefly talk about the article and find out what was wrong with it, break down all the numbers and find out the real profit, and benchmark it to the stock market to answer the age-old question of whether this was able to outperform the US stock market, and finally put things into perspective and circle back to answer what you as buyers can do about it. Alright, so let's start with what's wrong with the article. The unit in question here is a 5-room unit, but somehow the article quoted the selling price of a 4-room unit instead, and used that to calculate the gross profits, which was listed as $760K. So to calculate the profits, we need to first determine the buying price of the unit. But because we don't know the specifics, we can't get the actual buying price of this unit. So we need to make some estimates. This side here seems to indicate that the unit was bought between $544K and $625K. That looks about right to me. We don't need to be super accurate, we just need to get a ballpark figure. Since it is a mid-floor unit, let's just take the midpoint, which is around $584K. Wait, but if the gross profit is not $760K, then what is the actual gross profit? We'll be answering that in a bit. And actually, let's do a better job than this article here, and let's talk about net profits instead. Because at the end of the day, there are many hidden costs when it comes to buying, owning, and selling a property. Just looking at the gross profits will not paint you the full picture here. To understand how much gross and net profits were actually made, let's first understand what gross and net profit is. Gross profit is simply taking the selling price and subtracting the purchase price. Gross profit gives you somewhat of an estimate of how healthy the sale was, but it does not paint the full picture because as a property owner, you have to pay many other costs like interest, taxes, duties, agent fees, and so on. So to get a more holistic understanding of how much money the seller actually walked away with, we need to look at the net profits. Let's keep things simple here and define net profit as the sales price minus the purchase price and all other associated costs. When we talk about costs, we can really go down the rabbit hole here. So to avoid that, let's just talk about the major cost. To make things clearer, I will be talking about the costs related to these 3 main categories: the purchase cost, the running costs, and the selling costs. Putting all the costs aside, let's jump back and talk about gross profits first. It's quite easy to answer how much gross profits were actually made. We just need to take the selling price of $1.2 million and subtract off the purchase price, which we originally estimated to be $584K. That gives us a gross profit of $616K. So you can see how this is different from what the article reported as $760K. So now that we've got gross profits out of the way, let's get down to brass tacks and talk about how much net profits was actually made. As per this formula, we need to deduct all the cost from the gross profits, so let's do that. The first category of cost is the purchase cost. So to purchase the unit, the seller must have put in a buyer's stamp duty of $12K. He also would have paid legal fees, which is around $400, and renovation of about $80,000. Of course, since I don't actually know the guy, I don't know how much worth of renovation he actually put in. So this $80,000 here is just an estimate based on the size of a 5-room unit and 5 years ago. The second category of cost would be the running cost. These are some of the major costs that the owner would have incurred during his 5 years of staying in the unit. The first is the interest, which comes up to be a total of $63,000. When the owner stays in the house, he needs to pay a monthly installment to service his mortgage loan. This monthly installment comprises of 2 components. The first component is the interest, And the second component is the principal. The principal is something that he would get back after he sells his house. The interest is something that goes to the bank and he would never see again. The second aspect of the running cost is the property tax, which is paid annually. This is about $186 a year. Multiplied by 5, this would be about $900 over 5 years. In terms of conservancy fee, let's just take a ballpark estimate of $65 and multiplying by 12 months and 5 years, that gives us a total of about $3,900. The third category of costs are what I call the selling costs. These are costs that the owner would have to incur when he decides to sell his house. The first aspect of the selling cost is the agent fee. So when most people sell a house, they would usually choose to engage an agent to sell the house for them. And this agent would charge a commission to the seller. In most cases, the commission or the agent fee is about 2%. So 2% of the selling price of $1.2 million is about $24,000. When the owner sells the house, he also needs to incur a legal fee. This legal fee is about $670. The third aspect of the selling cost is actually the grants. In a normal case, when the owner sells the house, the grants will be returned back to his CPF OA. So actually during the sales, the grants actually come in the form of money in rather than money out. So instead of deducting the grants, we would add the grants back. In this case here, again, because I don't know the guy, I don't know his income, I'm not able to pinpoint precisely how much of grants he received. So what I did was I made a rough estimate using the grant structure back in 2015. If this looks a bit foreign to you, that's because the grant structure back in 2015 was actually very different from the grant structure we have today in 2024. So after deducting all the costs from our gross profits, we have a net profit of $491K. So after doing all the math, we have got the net profit. Well, the net profit is actually a very good number to have, and sorry to disappoint you, actually the net profit still does not paint us the full picture. What it does tell us was how much money was made in the absolute terms. But let's say if you want to talk about this in the perspective of an investment, we need to look at how much net profit was made in relation to how much money the owner actually put into the property. The amount of money that he put into the property is actually more than just a cost, because it comprises of other elements like the principal aspect of his monthly installment and his down payment as well. So what we want to find out is what we call the cash on cash return. How much cash he received in profit vis-a-vis how much cash he actually had to put into the property over the 5 to 10 years. Let me just dwell on this a little bit longer. If we simply take the net profit divided by the purchase price, we get 84%. But this is not an accurate number. Why? Because 584K was not the sum actually invested. This was the estimated price, but that does not mean that the owner put in 584K of his own money. In real estate, we have the concept, or what we call the power of leverage, which comes in the form of a home loan. So in this case here, in order for the seller or the owner to buy a unit of 584K, he actually did not need to come up with 584K of his own money. So now let's add in all these other elements that the owner need to come up with and put it into the picture. Using the numbers from above, here is how much the owner has paid over the years. The two main differences would be the down payment. In most cases, this number would not be $0 because actually you do need to come up some either cash or CPF to cover your down payment. But in this case, I set it at 0 because using the income that I estimated, he probably would have paid $0 because the grants would be just nice to cover his down payment. The second aspect that I added in here was also the monthly installment. So earlier on, we only covered the interest, but besides the interest, there is also the principal component, and that comes in the monthly installment here. The other figures are all the associated costs, which we talked about earlier on. So adding all these costs up, that brings his total cash input to 345K. So his cash on cash return over 9 years would be 491K divided by 345K. That would give us 1.4. That is to say, for every dollar that he invested, he not only received his capital back, but received an additional $1.40 in profit. Not a bad deal if you ask me. Since we are on the topic of investments, the other way that you can look at this is through the lens of the CAGR. CAGR stands for Compound Annual Growth Rate. It is a useful metric to show how much an investment grows over time in a smooth and consistent manner, even if the actual returns vary year by year. I don't want to make this too complicated, but the reason why I'm bringing in CAGR into the picture is because I want to compare this real estate investment to a stock market investment. And that will help us answer the age-old question of whether this was a better investment compared to the stock market, aka the S&P 500.
The S&P 500.
The S&P 500.
The S&P 500 Index Fund.
The S&P 500 is a stock market index that tracks the performance of the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the US, providing a broad representation of the US economy. It is widely used as a benchmark for overall market performance and as a reference for investors looking to gauge the health of the stock market. Even though the S&P 500 has fluctuated over time with periods of significant growth and significant decline, historically, the S&P 500 has delivered a CAGR of about 10%. So that is the number that we want to beat, and now back to the BTO. This is the formula that we will be using to derive the CAGR. There is one small disclaimer here. The disclaimer here is that in the CAGR formula, the costs are all assumed to be paid as part of the beginning value. But in this case of the BTO, this is not true. For example, in reality, the monthly installments are paid over the duration of the 5 years. So it is not entirely a fair comparison. But like I said earlier, I don't want to get too much in the rabbit hole. So this is just a benchmark comparison between the two. Using the formula here and plugging in the numbers, we get a CAGR of 13%, which means that in theory, this BTO managed to outperform the US stock market. Personally, I'm not that surprised because I expect a BTO to 1.5 to 2x its value after the MOP. But what about you? Did you expect this? Let me know in the comment section below. But now that we have seen the numbers, let's bear in mind that at the end of the day, all these are just numbers. Let's quickly put things into perspective before coming back to answer the question of what buyers can do about it. Not only was the seller able to outperform the S&P 500, he was also able to enjoy brand new, top quality government housing in a relatively central location in Singapore. Was this a sure win? Did this happen overnight? Was this all skill, or was there some element of luck involved? So when looking at this, we should also remember that this seller had to win the so-called lottery to secure a unit here in the first place. Besides just potentially trying a few times and then maybe winning the lottery, he also had to wait for potentially 3 to 4 years for the unit to be built and suffer the COVID delays before he had a chance to get his key.
Almost 70% of public housing projects completed since last year were hit by delays of up to 6 months. Now, the rest suffered longer disruptions of up to 10 months.
After all that, he also had to wait out the 5-year MOP before he was allowed to sell the unit. Meaning, if you put this into perspective, overall this was a 10-year investment and 10-year wait. So yes, we know that the BTO can yield you a good amount of profit after the MOP. So this seller is actually very lucky because not only was he able to secure a unit, he actually went for a 5-room unit, which meant that he managed to make more profits. But besides just money, he also had a very good and central location to stay at, which means that this BTO was both a good investment and hopefully a good home as well. This twin benefit makes it even more powerful because when you're talking about solely investments and the stock market, you're not factoring in your home yet. So that means besides the stock market, you may need to rent or buy a house elsewhere. But this BTO was able to fulfill both aspects. But zooming out from this individual and to the masses, unfortunately, not everybody will be so lucky to get a ballot number for a BTO. You may not be able to wait for the 3 to 4 years for the house to be built. Some of us may need a home right away. So this time is something that the seller had to sacrifice in order to make these profits. Buying a BTO, in my opinion, indirectly allows you to translate time to money. It allows you to start your wealth accumulation journey much earlier on, even possibly as students. However, if time is not on your side, you may need to consider a resale option. Either a resale HDB or a resale condo, depending on your budget and your need. You can check out other videos on my channel, or consider subscribing as one of my upcoming videos will be breaking down the difference between a resale HDB and a BTO.